There was a show called How I Met Your Mother, and they were going to make another one called How I Met Your Dad, starring me. They didn't like it at all. They test it. The audience, they're given knobs, and they turn the knob to the right if they like it, and to the left if they don't. They turned the knob to the left every time I came on. They didn't like it.
With the incredible success and iconic status that came with How I Met Your Mother, it pretty much guaranteed that a sequel or spin-off would emerge somewhere down the line. A fact which rings even more true with Hulu's How I Met Your Father.
However,
long before there was a How I Met Your Father, there was almost a How I Met Your Dad, with a cast that included the likes of Anders Holm, of Workaholics fame, Andrew Santano, of Terrorizing Bobby Lee fame, and Nicholas D'Agosto, who I'm probably butchering his last name, but I recognize as Gotham's Harvey Dent. I never forget a face, especially one that's one day going to be horrifically scarred. And I'm also just now realizing that he was also Hunter on The Office? Wow, I feel incredibly old all of a sudden. With the show's leading lady being played by Greta Gerwig, who has seen incredible success in recent years, working more on the writing and directing end of things, being the creative mind behind Lady Bird, Little Woman, and most recently, the Barbie movie amongst others. I think it's safe to say that she's made the right career move, because even if the show was greenlit, it would have never taken off.
Attention! Attention, people of New York. I am using this bullhorn to announce something very exciting. We found a bullhorn!
This is my favorite song. It's set to ringtone called xylophone. I wrote this on the long subway home.
That's bananagrams. In fact, I'm gonna go on a limb here. I'm out on a limb, little tiny limb. It's real shaky. I'm scared.
We made one cake, so we're making a second cake.
This girl from high school, she had sex with the debate coach in the back of a Nissan Sentra.
Oh, that's nasty.
They got married.
Oh, that's sweet. Hi.
Hello.
Sally, you are making a very immature decision right now.
Immature?
Yes, immature. I can be a more mature partner in this marriage. Yes, mature.
It's gonna be like 50 Shades of Grey had a baby with Cirque du Soleil, a sex baby. We're gonna Danny and Todd's gay friend.
Hello, I'm gay. I'm Frank. I'm gay Frank.
Yeah, that's how we say that.
As you can see, I am wearing my red leather moto jacket, which means I am furious.
You put on a special outfit just to come yell at me?
Holy crap, I love that.
As a matter of fact, I would even say comparatively, How I Met Your Father had much more potential than this show ever did. But once again, we'll get into that in a little bit. Greta portrayed the main character Sally, who's about to exit her 20s, and also her first marriage, with none other than Meg Ryan playing future Sally. Though similar to co-parent show How I Met Your Mother, we never actually see the aged main character. We only hear her in the opening of the show and in narrations throughout the episode. There's a lot about this pilot that's fairly interesting, but unfortunately, the plot isn't one of those things. It's a pretty basic premise. Sally starts the episode off by talking about how happy she is in her marriage to Gavin, and one freeze frame and Meg Ryan line later, she's single once again. Leaving a serious relationship, Sally moves in with her brother Danny and his boyfriend Todd. Todd is also an old college buddy of Sally's, and she set the two of them up, meaning she's almost just as close to Todd as she is to her actual brother. Her brother Danny tries to encourage her to get back with her husband, while her best friend Juliet tries to get her to move on from him, even setting her up for a blind date with Frank. And that's an alright premise for a plot. The show's starting off simple. It's an easy to maintain plot that does a decent job of introducing all its leads. I mean, they're obviously not all fleshed out yet. As a matter of fact, they're really just the most basic blueprint of a character. Some, not even that. Danny and Todd are the grown-up couple with a healthy dynamic despite having conflicting personalities. Frank is the good guy, I guess. He's nice. That's his thing. He's a nice guy. Juliet's defining trait is best friend. And even the lead Sally's defining trait was just getting dumped. Obviously these characters would get fleshed out and built on over time, but the foundation just doesn't feel all that sturdy here. By the close of the episode, I feel like we know more about Danny than anybody else, and I think that might just be because Andrew Santino was able to showcase a personality despite the material desperately trying to dull it down. I don't know anything about these characters by the time the credits close, and I feel like I should at least have some vague idea as to who they are or who they're supposed to be, but no, not at all. But the biggest issue of this episode is just that it's not really all that funny. There are jokes, but they're not really landing. Even the original show's famous/infamous laugh track couldn't be bothered to chuckle for this. It's very easy for me to see why this pilot wasn't picked up. The episode feels very soulless. There's definitely a disconnect with the characters because even the actors don't seem entirely too sure what to do with the material. It's not painfully unfunny, it's not so bad it's must-see, it's just kind of forgettable. At no point does this show make an impression. Good or bad. It's like the white rice of TV show pilots. It's bland and tasteless, it does nothing. I can definitely tell that they were trying to emulate the atmosphere of the original show, and quite frankly, I think that's smart. I think a How I Met Your Mother sequel series would be smart to just try to recreate the approach of the first series, but tell their own story with it. I truly think that success could be found that way. But the problem with How I Met Your Dad is, it didn't actually have a story to tell past its premise. The show didn't have any heart. It didn't feel like it was made with the same love that the original was clearly made with. It failed to create characters that were cared about, or even characters worth remembering past the closing credits. I actually had to go back and look up all of the characters' names right after I'd watched this pseudo-episode twice. I know this is a whole lot of assumptions to make for a series that didn't make it to air, and also only got one chance to tell its story in a 21-minute pitch, but first impressions are everything with series. This was their chance to not wow audiences, but to wow studio and network executives to get picked up. And yet, this was the lackluster, lackadaisical effort that they put forward. Audiences wouldn't have flocked to this. Not even in modern day media for a hate watch, because it's not even worth that. It's not so bad that it's offensive. It's offensively, inoffensively terrible. Had this show been picked up, I don't even know that it would have lasted a full season. I think it would have been quietly cancelled halfway through its first season, with the rest of the episodes appearing in the special features of some How I Met Your Mother box set. Interestingly enough, though, despite copy and pasting the concept of How I Met Your Mother, this gender-swapped spin-off does take deviations from the original formula. The biggest of which being, what was the first show's whole narrative structure becomes the sister show's pilot's narrative structure. How I Met Your Mother spent the vast majority of its series having the main character meet plenty of potential mothers for his children, only revealing who the mother was at the tail end of season 8. The mystery on How I Met Your Dad ends at the end of episode 1, with Sally mentioning that Frank was in fact the father. So I really hope you like these bland characters, because there's not going to be any reveal to look forward to. It seems like How I Met Your Father actually reworked a couple elements into its show from this pilot, with the second episode of the actually aired show ending in the same way the first episode of the unaired show does. The series' main character turning down the supporting lead, but obviously and subtly setting up the flirtation of a future between the two. Like that other show, this episode ends with certain friendships forming in very unlikely circumstances. Everyone else knows each other. Juliet's best friends with Sally, Sally's best friends with Todd, Todd is married to Danny, Danny is Sally's brother. They all know each other, they all have a history there. But Frank really has no reason to be here. He doesn't know any of the characters outside Juliet, and he doesn't really know her all that well either. A fact which is emphasized with Juliet not remembering his name at the start of the episode. They just work together. Meanwhile, he's brought to a bad date's house following a reunion with her husband. He stands idly by as the two break up again, and then goes back to the bar with her friends, thus being inducted into this motley crew, I guess? I don't really see why he'd be sticking around. It just seems like a strange situation one would probably look to get out of as soon as possible. But why let logic get in the way of a bad story? The show isn't poorly acted. From what I can see, everyone attached is fairly talented. The problem is what they were selling, no one was buying. A lot of people discredit sequel series How I Met Your Father, and don't get me wrong, some of the criticisms that they have are fairly valid. But believe you me when I say that show was a step up from what could have been. I completely understand why this pitch was left by the wayside, despite the massive success of How I Met Your Mother. But that's for reasons unrelated to the pilot itself. You see, the show was intended to be brought to the air the same year that How I Met Your Mother was taken off it. Where that show ended, this one was to begin. And I think because of that, this show needed to make a bigger impression. This needed to immediately live up to its famous sibling. Spiritually speaking, this one would be picking up where that last one left off. The fanbase wouldn't necessarily accept any attempt at extending the brand. If Friends has taught us anything, then it should be that. How I Met Your Father at least has a long sense of separation from the original series, despite actually canonically being connected to it. By the time that show came out, so much time had passed that it wasn't going to get torn down the same way a follow-up series set in the first one's wake would. There was an unavoidable comparison and measuring stick that was probably set far too high. And if this show came out as is, I don't think it would have succeeded. It was far too soon and the project just wasn't strong enough on its own to overcome that. It would have been overshadowed one way or another. And that's just talking about the crowd that was still invested in the brand. How I Met Your Mother's series finale wasn't well received by old fans, with a lot of those who loved the show feeling let down with the way things ended, meaning that there was probably a percentage of the fan base that was already not going to give How I Met Your Dad a chance. Less eyes would be on the product. I feel like this is one of those cases where the name value of the brand actually worked against the product. What should have elevated this sort of made it sink. Had this show not been developed as a spiritual sequel to one of the most iconic sitcoms of the 21st century, well, maybe it might have had a little bit more of a chance. Don't get me wrong, the pilot isn't great. I mean, this puts the rough in rough draft. The jokes aren't funny, the characters are generic, and a lot of the episode's story feels rushed. There's also the fact that the episode decided to end the way that it did. What was the hook of the original show wasn't going to be a factor here. There was no second guessing and piecing together who the father might be because the show came out and told you immediately who he was. So that was yet another big aspect from the original show that would be missing here. But there was still some charm to it. I think they had a great team of talent who were all well cast. Bland initial characterizations could have been smoothed out over time. The pilot also had the quirk of the original show, and I'm sure if it was afforded time and the opportunity to continue, that could have worked itself out as well. Most shows aren't fully fleshed out by the end of their first season, so this potential sequel series start not being perfected by the end of its first episode is completely understandable. Personally, I think this pilot was just as valid as the actual eventual spin-off. It's of the same quality, and I think both are cases of unrecognized potential. There's a lot that works here, and a lot that could have worked if this moved forward. However, I can also very clearly see what wasn't. And given the time and circumstances, I don't blame anybody for not picking this show up. It was probably a lot more of a risk back then than it would be today. The show wasn't picked up because the studio had problems with the pilot. They'd initially given their thoughts and asked the showrunners to reshoot it, but after a near decade of working on Himium, they were more than a little reluctant to make changes, deciding not to reshoot the pilot and instead shop it around. Ultimately, nothing would ever come of this. The project wasn't picked up, and would be labeled as dead for several years, until new showrunners came along and reworked the script of this pilot and created How I Met Your Father. It's really interesting to see the shared DNA between the two.
We're not so different, you and I.
Simply put, this just wasn't it. I think it's a real tell that everyone attached to this project is off doing better things today. If you like this video and would like to see more videos on How I Met Your Mother, How I Met Your Father, and everything in between, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
I never told you how I met your mother?
No.
Oh, great story.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.